My ranch gate locked shut as chain-rasped boots grinding gravel, cold wind snapping the notice while the HOA president stood there watching. The HOA president read the updated ranch gate access code notice aloud, tapping the paper like the board owned it, neighbors watching from trucks idling just a few yards away. That county property survey, its creased lines and file tab edge catching light, rested folded in my hand, all morning long, still answering nothing yet. Mike whispered, finally, someone fought back.
The board could call it community access, but the gate still sat inside a county-marked private boundary. That shifts the dispute away from routine use and toward title review.
The keypad on my ranch gate blinked red. Then it made a sharp sound. I frowned and tried the code again. Still locked. That was the same code I'd used for 10 years. I could punch it in without looking. Most mornings I did exactly that, roll up to the gate, tap, the numbers hear the lock release, and drive the gravel road straight back to my house. But this time the gate didn't move. Behind the metal bars stretched the only road leading into my ranch, a narrow strip of packed dirt cutting through pasture grass and cottonwood trees. And suddenly it wasn't letting me in. I sat there for a moment with the truck idling, staring at the keypad like it might suddenly remember who I was. The wind pushed through the dry grass along the fence line. The keypad blinked again. Red. Come on, I muttered. I stepped out of the truck and walked up to the gate. The metal frame was still the same old ranch steel, solid and square, mounted between two weathered cedar posts. Nothing about the gate looked different, just the keypad refusing to listen. I wiped the dust off the numbers and typed the code slowly, one digit at a time. The lock didn't even try. Nothing. I leaned closer to the keypad, squinting at the tiny display screen. It showed one word. That was new. I stood there for another second, trying to think if I'd forgotten something. Maybe the battery was dying. Maybe the keypad had reset overnight. Maybe the code had somehow changed. But there was only one code. My code. Behind me, tires crunched on gravel. I turned just as Mike's old Ford pickup rolled up and stopped a few yards back. Mike leaned his elbow out the window. Gate broken. I don't know, I said. Code stopped working. He shut off his engine and stepped out of the truck. Mike had lived on the next ranch over for 20 years. He'd seen this gate open and close thousands of times. He walked up beside me and looked at the keypad. That the same code you've always had, yeah. I typed it again just to prove it. Mike frowned. That's strange. No kidding. He rubbed his chin and glanced along the fence line. Then he pointed toward the metal post beside the gate. You see that I followed his finger. A white piece of paper was taped to the post. I hadn't noticed it when I pulled up. It flapped slightly in the wind. I walked over and peeled it off the metal. Printer paper. Official looking. At the top were 3 words in bold letters. Mike gave a low whistle. What's the HOA doing with your gate? That's a good question. I read the notice again, slowly. The wind rattled the chain hanging beside the gate. The paper explained that the HOA board had updated the ranch gate access code. It also explained the change was part of a community access adjustment. I read that line twice. Community access. To my ranch. Mike shifted beside me. What does it say? I held the page out so he could see. His eyebrows lifted. They changed your code. Looks like it. Mike leaned closer to the paper. Did they talk to you first? No. Did they ask permission? No. He shook his head slowly. That doesn't sound right. The notice continued with another line. All access to the ranch road would now be managed through the HOA board. Mike blinked. That's your driveway. I know. He looked back at the gate, then at the notice again. They can't do that. I folded the paper in half. Apparently they think they can. Mike crossed his arms and leaned against the fence. You gonna call them? Oh, I'm definitely calling them. The wind picked up again, rattling the chain against the steel gate. I turned back to the keypad and looked at it one more time. Red light. Locked. The same gate I'd opened every morning for 10 years. Now it needed a code I didn't have. Mike shook his head. Never thought I'd see the day an HOA tried to control a ranch gate. Neither did I. He nodded toward the notice in my hand. What's their excuse? I glanced down at the page again. There was a paragraph near the bottom I hadn't fully read yet. That's where the real explanation was. And the more I read it, the clearer things became. The code failure wasn't the worst part. The notice explained why they changed it, and that part was going to cause a problem. A big one. Because according to the HOA board, the ranch road behind that gate wasn't just my driveway anymore. They believed it belonged to the whole community. I looked back at the keypad. Red light still blinking. Then I folded the notice carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Mike watched me. You heading to the HOA office? Yep. He nodded once. Good. I opened my truck door and climbed back inside. The engine started with a low rumble. Before pulling away, I glanced at the gate one last time. 10 years of using that code. Gone overnight. Mike leaned into the window. You want me to stick around and keep an eye on things? Nah, I said. I've got a better idea. What's that? I'm going to find out exactly who decided they could lock me out of my own land. Mike smiled. Let me know how that goes. Oh, I will. I pulled the truck into reverse and backed down the gravel road. The gate stayed locked. The red light blinked behind me. Beep. I drove straight to the HOA office. The red keypad light from my ranch gate stayed stuck in my head the whole way. Blinking. Locked. Denied. The building sat near the entrance of the subdivision, one of those beige offices with neat landscaping and a small wooden sign that said Mountain Ridge Homeowners Association. It looked quiet. Too quiet. I parked beside the curb and stepped out of the truck. For a moment I just stood there, thinking about the gate, thinking about that notice taped to my fence, thinking about how someone sitting in this office had decided they could change the code to the only road into my land. The glass door opened with a soft chime. Inside the office smelled like printer toner and carpet cleaner. A wall map of the neighborhood covered the far side of the room. Little colored lines showed the subdivision roads winding through the hills. None of them ran through my ranch. A receptionist sat behind a counter typing into a computer. She looked up. Can I help you? Yeah, I said. I need the new gate code. Her smile stopped halfway. For the ranch gate, that's the one. For a second, she just looked at me. Then her eyes flicked toward the back hallway. Just a moment. She pressed a button on the phone beside her. Tom, could you come up front? I leaned on the counter while we waited. The wall map caught my eye again. Someone had drawn a red line along the road leading toward my property. I studied it for a second. That road was labeled Community Access Route. That was new. Footsteps sounded in the hallway behind the desk. A man in a polo shirt walked out adjusting his glasses. Late 40s, clipboard in hand. HOA manager. He stopped when he saw me. What seems to be the issue? You changed the code on my ranch gate. He didn't even blink. Instead, he folded his arms like he'd already rehearsed the answer. That gate controls community access. No, I said calmly. That gate controls my driveway. The receptionist glanced between us. The manager shook his head. Our board voted to update all access points. That's not an access point. It's a shared road. I stared at him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said it slowly. You're telling me the HOA now controls the gate to my land. The manager looked past me toward the glass door like he wished this conversation was happening somewhere else. Finally, he sighed. The board believes that's correct. A couple sitting in the waiting area looked over. Public exposure. They'd heard enough to know what the argument was about. The board believed they controlled my gate. I straightened up. That gate sits on my property line. He shrugged slightly. The road has been used by residents for years. That doesn't make it theirs. It makes it a community route. I shook my head. No. It makes it a road people drove on because I didn't mind. He tapped the clipboard with his pen. Well, the board voted last week for what to update access across the subdivision, and that included changing my gate code. Yes. The receptionist shifted uncomfortably behind the desk. I leaned forward. You changed the code without telling me. Yes. And you're refusing to give it back. That decision came from the board. Another pause filled the room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I glanced again at the map behind him, that red line marking my road. Somebody in this office had decided to draw it there. The road wasn't the only thing they'd changed. You know that's private property, I said. The manager lifted his chin. The board believes otherwise. I let that sit there. Long enough for the couple in the waiting chairs to lean forward slightly. Then I said the line that had been sitting in my head since I left the ranch. You don't vote on someone else's driveway. The receptionist looked down at her keyboard. The manager didn't respond. Instead, he reached into a folder on the desk. He slid a piece of paper across the counter. Slowly. The page scraped against the wood surface. Silent beat. I looked down. The document had an official HOA header at the top, then a bold title. I read the first line. It explained that the HOA board had scheduled a formal review regarding ranch gate access and community road designation. I looked back up. You filed a hearing, yes, for my gate, for the access issue. I held the paper between my fingers. So instead of giving me the code back, we'll settle the matter through the board. The receptionist cleared her throat quietly. The couple in the waiting area whispered to each other. Public exposure again. People were already hearing about it. I folded the paper once, then again. You understand that gate controls the only road to my ranch? The manager nodded. Yes. And you're locking it. That's the board's decision. The decision was already made. I tucked the document into my jacket pocket. All right. The manager raised an eyebrow. That's it for now. I turned and walked toward the door. The receptionist watched me leave. Just before I stepped outside, the manager spoke again. The hearing is Thursday night. I stopped with my hand on the door. Good. He sounded surprised. You're attending. I opened the door. Wouldn't miss it. Door chime. The afternoon air hit me as I stepped back outside. For a second, I just stood there on the sidewalk. The hearing notice in my pocket felt heavier than paper. Behind me, the office door closed. Inside that building, someone had decided my ranch road belonged to the whole community. That meant one thing. This argument wasn't about a gate code anymore. It was about ownership, and Thursday night they were going to try to prove it.
Shared use can feel persuasive, but access rights usually require something stronger than habit. For a road to become enforceable beyond its owner, there normally has to be a documented easement or a filing reference inside the official registry. Without that recorded support, the claim rests on assumption, and the pressure shifts toward a land title examination to verify what access was ever formally recognized.
The next morning, I sat across from a property attorney while a ranch map covered most of his desk. It was a wide sheet creased at the folds and yellowed at the edges from years of handling. He adjusted his glasses, leaned forward, and asked the question that mattered first. "You said the HOA changed the code to your gate yesterday morning, and they claim the road is community access. That's their argument." He nodded once and picked up a pencil. Someone in the HOA office had drawn a line on a map. Now he was about to show me which map actually counted. The office smelled faintly like paper and coffee. Framed survey documents hung on the wall behind him. Rows of property records, boundary diagrams, real lines, not HOA guesses. He studied the map, then tapped the paper. "This line here is your boundary." I leaned forward. My ranch filled most of the sheet, a long rectangle bordered by creeks, fence lines, and county markers. The road came in from the south entrance and ran straight to my gate. "That's what I thought," I said. He traced the pencil slowly along the property edge. Then he stopped where the road crossed the boundary marker. And the gate, he tapped the exact spot. "Also yours." I let out a breath. "So the HOA has no authority there?" "Correct." That was the first hard answer I'd gotten since the keypad turned red. He turned the map toward me, then slid another document beside it. Fresh print, official, stamped at the bottom. The dark blue county stamp stood out immediately. Artifact, proof. He tapped it with the pencil. "That survey confirms the location of your gate." He leaned back in his chair. "Meaning the HOA changed a lock on property they don't control." I looked from the stamp to the boundary line again. The lines were simple, but they told the whole story. My fence, my road, my gate. He folded his hands. What exactly did the HOA notice say? I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the paper from the gate, and slid it across the desk. He read it in silence. Halfway down the page, he shook his head. "Community access adjustment." That's what they called it. He set the notice beside the survey and looked back at me. "They're trying to redefine the road. They told me the board voted on it." A faint smile crossed his face. He tapped the survey again. "Boards vote on policies." Then he tapped the boundary line. "They don't vote on property lines." That landed harder than anything the HOA manager had said in his office. The fluorescent lights hummed above us. The survey shifted slightly across the desk when he moved the notice aside. He went back to the map. "You said they scheduled a hearing Thursday night." He nodded. "That makes sense." "How they're preparing a legal argument." My jaw tightened. "For a gate code, no." He pointed to the road on the map. "For access rights." The room seemed quieter after that. The keypad was only part of it. The code change wasn't just a stunt. They were aiming past the gate and going after the road itself. They'll probably argue residents have used that road for years, he said. They have, which gives them the appearance of shared use. Appearance, yes. He tapped the survey again. But appearance doesn't override ownership. That was the second hard answer. The first told me where the boundary was. The second told me what the hearing was really about. I sat back a little. They're not going to back down easily. No. He folded the HOA notice neatly and slid it toward me. They've already escalated it. How they filed a formal hearing. That was the step that changed everything. Once the HOA put the issue on a hearing calendar, it stopped being a private argument at my gate. Neighbors would hear it. Board members would defend it. People would pick sides. I looked at the notice between us. They locked my gate. Yes. They scheduled a hearing. Yes. And they think they control the road. Apparently. He picked up the pencil again and traced the route slowly. From the county road, up the hill, through my pasture, right to the gate. Then he tapped the gate location one more time. You understand something important here. What's that? You control the access point. I looked at the mark under his pencil. The gate. Yes. He leaned back again. The HOA changed the code. Right. But they don't control the structure. I stared at the map. Gate location. Property line. Ownership. That was the shift. They had changed the code, but the gate itself was still mine. I asked the only question left. So how do I stop them? He smiled small and steady, like the answer had been sitting on the desk the whole time. You control the gate. Then he slid the survey fully across to me so there was no confusion about what he meant. You don't need permission to protect property you own. I looked down at the map again. The gate sat exactly where it had always been, on my side of the line. My land, my road, my decision. He handed the HOA notice back to me. What happens next Thursday night? And until then, he gave a slight shrug. You have options. I slipped the survey into a folder. What kind of options? He tapped the map once more right where the road met the gate. The kind that remind people who owns the gate. That was the third hard answer. Not just proof. Not just defense. Action. I stood up slowly. The chair legs scraped the floor. Outside the office window, the county courthouse lawn looked quiet and ordinary. Nothing about it matched the fight building around my ranch road. I picked up the folder. Thanks. He nodded. Just remember something. What's that? The law doesn't stop you from defending your property. I opened the office door. The hallway light flickered softly. Behind me, the survey was back on the desk. The stamp. The boundary. The gate. The HOA thought they controlled the code. Now I knew they didn't control the gate. And by Thursday night, they were going to learn the difference. The contractor arrived 2 days later. A flatbed truck rolled slowly up the ranch road behind him, tires crunching over gravel and dust. The steel frame strapped to the back caught the morning sunlight. Even from a distance, it looked heavier than the old gate. Stronger. Permanent. I leaned against the fence post and watched the truck pull up beside the entrance. The keypad on the old gate blinked red again. Same denial as before. Same locked road. But today, the gate wasn't staying. The contractor stepped out of the truck and stretched his back. Tall guy. Work gloves already on. He walked over to the keypad gate and circled it slowly, examining the hinges and the posts. You want this replaced? He asked. Yeah. He knocked his knuckles against the metal frame. The sound rang hollow. With what I nodded toward the flatbed. Steel. He looked over his shoulder at the cargo. The steel gate frame sat chained to the truck bed, dark gray, reinforced with a new keypad housing already welded to the side. The contractor raised an eyebrow. That'll stop anyone. That's the idea. Stopping people was exactly the point. The wind pushed dust across the pasture fence as he grabbed a wrench and walked back to the gate. He crouched by the hinges and looked at the keypad panel. HOA installed this system. They changed the code, I said. He nodded once. Seen that before. He loosened the first hinge bolt. The metal creaked. Then the gate sagged slightly. Within minutes, the old keypad gate hung crooked between the posts. A decade of daily use reduced to loose bolts and worn hinges. The contractor stepped back. You sure about this? I glanced at the ranch road behind the gate. Long stretch of dirt leading through pasture and trees toward my house. My land, I said. My gate. He shrugged. Fair enough. The second hinge came off, then the third. The old gate lowered slowly to the ground. Silent beat. Dust lifted as the metal frame touched the gravel. The old gate was gone. The ranch entrance stood open for the first time in years. The contractor wiped his hands and walked back to the truck. Let's bring in the replacement. The flatbed engine started again. The steel gate slid slowly down the ramp as he guided it toward the posts. Up close, the thing looked massive. Thicker steel, reinforced bars, new keypad housing. The contractor lined the frame up with the cedar posts. Then he drilled the new hinges into place. The sound echoed across the pasture. Metal on metal. Bolts tightening. Time passing. Within an hour, the new gate stood where the old one had been. He stepped back and nodded. Heavy. Solid. Unmovable. The keypad panel lit up. Green. The contractor wired the lock and closed the gate. The mechanism engaged. Gate locked. This time the lock answered to me. I stepped forward and typed the new code. The keypad flashed. Green. The steel gate slid open smoothly. Quiet. Controlled. Then it rolled closed again. Silent beat. Dust drifted across the road while the gate sealed shut. Permanent. That's when a black SUV appeared at the end of the road. It rolled toward the entrance fast. The contractor glanced up, expecting company number. The SUV stopped a few yards from the gate. The door opened. The HOA president stepped out. Same polo shirt as the office. Same clipboard under his arm. He stared at the steel gate for several seconds. Then he walked closer. What is this gate? His eyes narrowed. You can't install barriers like this. I shrugged slightly. I just replaced a gate on my property. That road provides community access. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the keypad, typed the code. The steel gate opened smoothly, wide enough for a truck. Then it rolled closed again. Slow, deliberate. The new system worked perfectly. The HOA president walked up to the keypad. He studied the numbers. Then he typed something. Probably the code his board had chosen. The keypad flashed. Red. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still locked. The contractor leaned against the truck and watched. The president's jaw tightened. He typed the code a third time. The keypad didn't respond. The HOA code no longer controlled the gate. He stepped back slowly. "You can't do this." I crossed my arms. "You changed my code." "That was a board decision. This was mine." He looked from the keypad to the steel frame, then back at me. "You're interfering with HOA access." I shook my head. "No." I pointed toward the pasture behind the gate. "I'm protecting my property." The wind rattled the fence wire. The contractor climbed back into the truck. The HOA president stared at the gate one more time, then at the keypad, then at me. I said the only thing that needed saying. "You changed my code." I tapped the keypad again. The steel gate slid open and shut. Smooth. Controlled. "You changed my code," I repeated. So I changed the gate. Viral quote. Silent beat. The steel frame settled into its locked position. The HOA president stepped back from the keypad. Their code didn't open anything anymore. The steel gate was quiet the next morning. Heavy, solid, exactly where it belonged. Morning wind pushed across the pasture and rattled the fence wire. The steel bars of the new gate barely moved. The hinges didn't creak. The frame didn't flex. It just stood there, like it had been there forever. I leaned against the fence post with a cup of coffee and looked down the gravel road. The keypad glowed softly in the sunlight. Locked. Controlled. Mine. For the first time since the HOA changed the code, the gate answered to the right person. Then a truck appeared at the end of the road. A dark pickup. It rolled toward the entrance slowly. I recognized it before it even stopped. HOA president. Behind it, another truck turned off the county road. Then another. 3 vehicles rolled up in a line and stopped in front of the gate. The steel bars reflected the afternoon sun. Foreshadow. The HOA wasn't finished arguing about the gate. They were just getting started. Neighbor Mike's pickup pulled in behind mine and idled there. He leaned out his window. "Well," he said quietly, "looks like the welcoming committee showed up." I set the coffee cup on the fence post. "Looks that way." The HOA president stepped out of his truck. 2 board members followed behind him. They didn't say a word at first. They just walked straight to the gate. The president stopped at the keypad, studied it for a moment. Then he typed something, probably the code his board had installed 2 days ago. The keypad flashed red. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. The old code had completely lost control. Mike chuckled softly behind me. "Guess that code doesn't work anymore." The HOA president turned slowly. His expression tightened when he saw Mike leaning against the truck. Then he looked at me. "You can't block community access." I crossed my arms. "This road isn't community access. It has been for years. That doesn't make it yours." Wind pushed dust across the gravel road. The steel gate didn't move. One of the board members stepped forward. "You're interfering with HOA property." I pointed toward the fence line running down the hill. "This gate is on my ranch." The board member looked at the steel hinges bolted into the cedar posts, then at the pasture behind them. The president shook his head. "You installed this without HOA approval. I don't need HOA approval for my own gate." He gestured toward the road. "That road serves the community. It serves my ranch." Mike leaned his shoulder against his pickup and watched the conversation like a spectator at a ball game. The president stepped closer to the steel bars. You're obstructing access. I shrugged. You changed my code. That was a board decision, and this was mine. Neither side was backing down. The president stared at the keypad again. Then he typed the old code once more. The keypad blinked. Beep, nothing. Mike laughed quietly. You planning to guess the new one? The president ignored him. Instead, he walked back to his truck, opened the door, and reached inside. For a moment, nobody spoke. The wind rattled the gate chain. Silent beat. He returned holding a folded sheet of paper, official letterhead, HOA logo across the top. He unfolded it slowly and smoothed it across the hood of my truck. The paper fluttered slightly in the breeze. Artifact. HOA documentation. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was paperwork. He tapped the page once. You've received a compliance notice. I stepped closer and looked down. The top line read, HOA compliance notice. Underneath that violation, unauthorized gate installation. Mike leaned forward to read over my shoulder. Unauthorized, he muttered. The president folded his arms. You've installed a barrier that interferes with community use. I looked up at him. You can't fine someone for protecting their own property. Viral quote. The president ignored the comment. He pointed to the bottom of the document. There's a hearing scheduled. I glanced down again. A meeting date was printed near the bottom of the notice. Thursday evening. Board review. The exact same hearing the manager had mentioned in the office. Public exposure, residents, board members, everyone watching. Mike whistled quietly. That's fast. The president kept his eyes on me. You'll attend. That wasn't a question. No. Wind pushed across the pasture again. The steel bars hummed faintly as the gust hit them. The board member shifted uncomfortably. You should remove the gate before the meeting, he said. That would resolve the violation. I shook my head. No. The president stepped closer. Then the board will decide the next step. That sounded like a threat. Mike scratched his chin and looked at the steel frame. You planning to cut it down? The president didn't respond. He just folded the compliance notice again. Then he slid it across the hood of my truck toward me. Be there Thursday. I picked up the paper and looked at it one more time. HOA letterhead. Violation statement. Meeting date. Official language meant to sound powerful. But the steel gate behind us didn't care about paperwork. It just stood there. Locked. Mine. The president stepped back toward his truck. The two board members followed him. Before climbing inside, he glanced at the gate again, then at the keypad, then at me. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I folded the notice and slipped it into my jacket pocket. No, I said. I'm making it clear. Mike grinned. That gate seems pretty clear to me. The trucks started one by one, engines rumbling as they turned around on the gravel road. Within a minute, the HOA vehicles disappeared back toward the subdivision. Silence returned. Wind across pasture grass. Fence wire humming softly. Mike pushed himself off his pickup. Well, he said that escalated. A little. He nodded toward the gate. You going to that hearing? Good. He pointed at the steel bars. Because that thing just started a fight. I looked at the keypad, then at the ranch road stretching behind it. Locked. Protected. And exactly where it belonged. But the notice in my pocket said something else. The notice wasn't the real threat. The meeting date printed underneath was. The HOA meeting filled up faster than I expected. By the time I stepped into the community hall, most of the folding chairs were already taken, and people from the subdivision were already leaning forward like they'd shown up for a show instead of a board meeting. At the front of the room stood a long table with 5 board members behind it. The HOA president sat in the center with a microphone, a stack of papers, and a projector humming softly beside him. I took a seat halfway down the aisle. My attorney slid into the chair beside me with a thin folder under his arm. Property records, survey documents, evidence. The board probably thought tonight would pressure me into taking down the gate. They were wrong. My attorney leaned slightly toward me. Let them talk first. I nodded. That sounded fine to me. The room quieted when the HOA president tapped the microphone. This session concerns a property obstruction installed at the ranch entrance. A few murmurs moved through the chairs. The gate had already been labeled an obstruction before anyone had even looked at a real boundary line. The president clicked a remote. A photo of the steel gate appeared on the projector screen behind him. It filled the wall. My gate, taken from the road. Big. Solid. Impossible to miss. Mr. Whitmore installed a barrier blocking access to community land, the president said. Several residents leaned toward each other and whispered. That was movement, public exposure. What had started at my fence line was now sitting in front of the whole neighborhood under fluorescent lights. I stayed quiet. The attorney beside me didn't move. The president continued. For years, this road has served the neighborhood. He pointed at the projected image. The sudden installation of this structure interferes with HOA access and emergency routes. Emergency routes. That was new. I hadn't heard that one before. A board member beside him nodded seriously, and somewhere behind me someone whispered something about fire trucks. The argument had shifted again. My attorney leaned closer. Still want to let them finish, yeah. The president changed slides. A map appeared on the screen. Thin red lines traced subdivision roads across the hills. One of them ran toward my ranch. He tapped the screen. This route connects multiple properties. A few people nodded. From the back of the room, that map probably looked convincing. But my attorney didn't react. The board thought that map proved ownership. It didn't. The president folded his hands and looked down the room. We will now allow comments from the property owner. My attorney stood before I could. May I see the map you're using? That changed the room immediately. Board members exchanged glances. One of them lifted the paper copy of the map and passed it down the table. My attorney took it, looked once, looked twice, and set it down almost immediately. That map is incorrect. The room went silent. The projector hummed louder in the quiet. One of the board members frowned. Incorrect. Yes. That was the first real crack. The entire case they'd built in front of the room had just been challenged in one sentence. My attorney opened his folder. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. Property survey. Official. Stamped. He walked to the board table and placed it down carefully in front of the president. From halfway across the room, I could still see the blue stamp at the bottom. Received county record. Then he tapped the page once. This is the correct boundary. Residents leaned forward. Several stood slightly just to see the table better. Another shift. New evidence had entered the room, and it wasn't coming from the HOA. The president blinked at the survey. That survey was filed with the county, my attorney said calmly. He pointed to the stamp, recorded and verified. The board suddenly had a problem. Not a loud one. A paperwork problem. The kind that doesn't go away just because a board votes on something. My attorney slid the survey a little farther across the table and pointed at the boundary line. This is Mr. Whitmore's ranch. His finger traced the pasture line, then the road, then the gate. He tapped the exact location. The gate stands entirely on Mr. Whitmore's land.
Recorded surveys settle boundary questions long before HOA meetings begin. When a stamped county survey enters the room, it replaces opinion with documented lines. From that point on, any claim of community access has to be backed by something recorded, not just something the board believes.
Nobody said anything for a second. The room just stopped. A resident near the back whispered, "Wait." "What?" Another leaned toward the screen and then toward the serve like maybe one of them had to be lying. The president looked down at the survey, then up at the projected map, then back at the survey again. That was the real turn. The board's map didn't match the county record. And once that happened, the argument started slipping out of their hands. My attorney folded his hands and spoke without raising his voice. Internal maps don't control property lines. Recorded documents do. If the association claims access beyond that boundary, it needs something on record to support it. That was all he said. Short, clear, no lecture. But it landed. One of the board members cleared his throat. "So you're saying the HOA has no authority over the gate?" My attorney nodded. "That is exactly what I'm saying." The projector continued humming. The president studied the survey again. His finger followed the line around the road, then stopped at the gate. He leaned back in his chair slower this time. Whispers moved across the room, louder now. The public reaction had changed. A few minutes earlier, people had been watching a homeowner explain himself. Now they were watching the board realize its own map might not mean much. The gate wasn't blocking community land. The gate was protecting private land. The president glanced toward me. For the first time that night, he didn't look confident. My attorney closed his folder. "That survey is part of the county record," he said. "It establishes ownership." Another board member leaned forward. "If that's correct." He paused and looked around the table before finishing. "Then the gate is on private property." My attorney nodded again. "Yes." The room went quiet again. Not the earlier kind of quiet. This one was heavier, the kind that settles in after a public claim loses its footing. Chairs creaked as residents leaned forward. A woman near the aisle folded her arms. A man in the second row stared at the projected map, like he was seeing it differently now. Everyone waited for the board to say something that could put the room back in order. I stayed seated, watching. No reason to interrupt. The pressure had already moved where it needed to go. Out of opinion, out of presentation slides, out of meeting language, and into the one thing the board hadn't controlled when this started: the actual property line. The projector kept humming softly. The survey stayed on the table, and the board had just tried to regulate property they didn't control. The board asked for a short recess. 10 minutes. They needed it. The HOA president leaned into the microphone and announced it like the decision might still be complicated. But the room already understood what was happening. Residents shifted in their folding chairs as the board members stood up and walked toward the side door. The projector kept humming quietly. Silent beat. My attorney leaned back in his chair. They'll argue in the hallway, he said. They already know the answer. I looked around the room. Neighbors whispered to each other in small groups. Some were smiling. Some were shaking their heads. The meeting had stopped being a debate. Now it was just waiting for the board to admit it. Mike leaned forward from 2 rows back. He grinned at me. Guess they didn't expect that survey. Guess not. Across the room, a couple pointed at the projector screen where the photo of the steel gate still filled the wall. The same gate the board had called an obstruction 15 minutes earlier. Now it looked like something else. Evidence. The attorney beside me folded his hands calmly. They'll come back with a statement. Think they'll fight it? No. He nodded toward the survey sitting on the board table. They can't. Once the county record entered the meeting, the argument was over. It just hadn't been announced yet. The side door opened. Board members filed back into the room one at a time. Conversation stopped immediately. The HOA president returned to the center chair and adjusted the microphone. He shuffled the papers in front of him. One of those papers was the compliance notice they had issued 2 days earlier. Artifact. HOA paperwork. Silent beat. The president cleared his throat. This issue appears to involve private land. A voice from the back row said quietly, "You think?" A few people laughed. The president ignored them. He glanced down at the survey again. The board has reviewed the survey. The entire room leaned forward slightly. Residents, board members, even the attorney beside me sat a little straighter. The president paused for a moment before continuing. The gate sits on Mr. Whitmore's property. The attorney nodded once beside me. Correct. A board member to the president's left leaned toward his microphone, which means the HOA cannot require its removal. Murmurs spread across the room. Public catharsis. People shifted in their seats. Some nodded. Others looked back at the photo of the gate projected on the wall. The president rubbed his forehead. Then he looked out at the crowd. A resident in the back raised his hand. So the ranch owner was right the whole time. That question hung in the air for several seconds. The president sighed. Yes. More murmurs. The attorney beside me leaned back again. That settles the ownership question, he said quietly. The president picked up the compliance notice from the table. He looked at it for a moment. Then he spoke again. In light of the survey and property records, he paused. The violation notice will be withdrawn. Microclimax. Right there in the meeting. The paper folded quietly between his fingers. Silent beat. The president slid the notice back into a folder. Artifact removed. The steel gate was no longer a violation. It was simply a gate. Residents shifted again. Someone near the aisle whispered, "Told you it wasn't HOA land." Another person nodded toward the screen. Gate stays. The attorney beside me leaned closer. That's your confirmation. I looked at the front table. The board members avoided eye contact with the audience. The president adjusted the microphone again. But the meeting wasn't quite finished. He looked directly at me. Mr. Whitmore. Yes. He folded his hands on the table. There is one remaining question. The room quieted again. Even the whispering stopped. The president glanced briefly toward the photo of the steel gate, then back at me. Will the gate allow emergency access if necessary? Silent beat. The question hung in the room. Residents looked back and forth between the board and the steel gate on the screen. The board had lost control of the gate. But the president still wanted something from the man who owned it. The ranch road looked the same the next morning. Same stretch of gravel. Same fence posts marching across the pasture. Same wind moving slowly through the dry grass. But something had changed. The steel gate stood where it had the day before, solid between the cedar posts, keypad glowing softly in the early light. The difference wasn't the road or the gate. It was the argument that had finally ended. Sunrise spread across the ranch as I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the entrance. The steel bars cast a long shadow across the gravel. Quiet. Permanent. Foreshadow. The gate wasn't just a barrier anymore. It was a reminder. I stood there for a moment, looking down the road toward the pasture. A few cattle moved slowly near the far fence. Wind brushed across the grass. Normal morning. The keypad blinked green. Waiting. For the first time all week, the gate wasn't part of a fight. It was just doing its job. Behind me, tires rolled up the gravel road. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Mike's pickup. He pulled up beside the gate and rolled down his window. "Well," he said, looking at the steel frame, the famous gate. I smiled slightly. "Morning." He leaned his arm on the door. "So the HOA finally backed off, yep?" Mike nodded slowly. "Took them long enough." The sun climbed higher behind the fence line, lighting the keypad panel. Mike glanced at it. "That thing's not going anywhere, is it?" "No." He chuckled quietly. "Didn't think so." The gate had already won the argument. I stepped forward and typed the code. The keypad flashed green. Click. The steel gate began to slide open. Slow. Smooth. Controlled. Mike watched it move. Still feels strange seeing that thing open like a vault door. That's kind of the point. The gate rolled fully open and stopped. Mike eased his truck through the entrance. Dust lifted behind the tires as he crossed onto the ranch road. Then he stopped and leaned out the window. "Worth the fight." I looked back at the steel gate. Morning sunlight reflected off the metal bars. The hinges held firm. No creaking. No bending. Just quiet strength. Justice settling into place. "Yeah," I said. Mike nodded. "That board won't forget this. They won't try it again either." He glanced back toward the subdivision road. "You think the rest of the neighborhood learned something, and maybe they had. Or maybe the lesson was simpler." I stepped back from the keypad. The wind moved through the pasture again. Fence wire hummed faintly. Silent beat. Mike rested his arm on the door. "You know," he said, "a lot of folks were waiting for someone to push back." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Let's get comfortable sometimes. That's one way to put it." He grinned. "Guess they finally ran into a ranch gate that didn't listen." I laughed quietly. Something like that. Mike started his truck moving again. But before he drove off completely, he stopped one last time. "You heading into town later?" "Maybe." He pointed back toward the gate. "Well, I'll say this. What's that? That thing's going to make people think twice before arguing with a property line. That might be the real outcome of the meeting. Not paperwork, not apologies, just a visible boundary." Mike tipped his hat and drove farther up the ranch road. I watched the truck disappear around the bend. Dust settled slowly behind it. Then I stepped back toward the keypad, typed the code again. The steel gate rolled closed. Slow, solid. The mechanism locked. Click microclimax. The sound echoed lightly across the gravel road. Final. The gate stood still again. Sunlight warmed the steel bars. The pasture beyond the fence stretched wide and quiet. And for the first time all week, there were no trucks pulling up, no board members, no paperwork, just land, and the line that defined it. I rested my hand on the top rail for a moment. Cool steel, solid, permanent. Gates exist for a reason. They mark where one thing ends and another begins. They remind people when they've crossed a line they shouldn't. I stepped back and looked at the road again. The ranch stretched out behind the gate, exactly the way it had always been. Protected, clear, simple. Echo. And this one made the property line impossible to ignore. I glanced down the subdivision road one last time. Nobody there. No HOA trucks. No arguments. Just a quiet morning. And a steel gate doing exactly what it was built to do. Respect the line and we'll never have a problem. Morning sunlight glinted off the steel gate standing quietly across the ranch road. The county survey stamp still rested in my folder, a small blue record proving where the property line had always been. Boundaries aren't loud victories. They're steady reminders that ownership matters and accountability belongs to everyone. The hearing record and the withdrawn HOA notice made one thing clear: when a community respects the line, peace returns with it. Sometimes the strongest answer is simply standing firm until the truth opens the gate, because finally someone fought back.
Statements like this usually start with an assumption nobody bears to test. Over time, several things can begin to look like their authority, especially when but repeat it often enough to make it feel safe. But property systems do not rely on memory the way people do. They rely on written authority, documented boundary, and the small paper trail that can survive after condition runs out. That is a deeper risk in conflict realizes once assumptions start acting like unsafe. Ordinary access can harden into institutional overreach, and in the end, what restores order is usually not pressure, but the quiet force of record that was their owner alone.